The first thing I remember is the sound of rain hitting metal that wasn't supposed to be bent. The second thing I remember is my daughter screaming. I couldn't see her. My head was pressed sideways against the driver's side window, and the airbag had already collapsed into a pale, powdery sheet across my lap. There was glass in my hair. There was glass in my mouth. The dashboard was making a soft, polite chiming sound, the way a car does when you've left the door open in a parking lot. Except the door wasn't open, it was crumpled inward, and somewhere behind me, in a rear-facing infant seat I had installed myself 3 weeks earlier with shaking, postpartum hands, my 3-week-old daughter was screaming the kind of scream that comes from a baby who has just learned that the world is not soft. I tried to say her name, Eleanor. It came out as a sound, not a word. I don't know how long I was there before the flashlight crossed my face. A man's voice asked me if I could hear him. I could. He asked me if I knew where I was. I didn't. He asked me my name, and I gave it to him, slowly, like I was handing him something fragile. Claire. Claire Bennett. Claire, is that your baby in the back? Eleanor, I said. Her name is Eleanor. She's okay, Claire. She's crying, and that's good. Crying is good. We're gonna get you both out. Stay with me. They cut the door away. I remember the smell of the rain and the smell of the airbag chemical, and underneath both of them, the sweet, milky, unmistakable smell of my daughter, who someone I couldn't see, had lifted out of the car and was holding under a jacket to keep the rain off her face. In the ambulance, the paramedic, a young man with a soft voice and a wedding ring he kept twisting around his finger, asked me if there was anyone they could call. I gave him my mother's number. I gave it to him without thinking, the way you give someone your own birthday. She was 40 minutes away. She kept her phone on the kitchen island. She would pick up. He stepped out of the back of the ambulance to make the call. I watched him through the open doors. I watched the rain bead on his shoulders. I watched him nod, and then nod again, and then go very still. When he came back inside, he wouldn't look at me at first. He checked Eleanor's vitals. He adjusted the strap on my stretcher. He cleared his throat twice. Claire, he said, is there anyone else we can call? I didn't understand the question. My mom is 40 minutes away, I said. She'll come, she just needs the address. He sat down on the little jump seat across from me. He put his hand gently on the railing of my stretcher, not on me, just near me, the way you do with an animal you don't want to spook. Mom, he said, your mother said she couldn't come tonight. She said there's an event she has to be at. She asked if you were going to live, and when I told her we believed so, she said she couldn't take the baby tonight either. She said to call somebody else. I heard the words. I understood the individual sounds. I could not assemble them into a sentence that meant anything. My father, I said. She said he was unavailable. I looked at my daughter, who someone had buckled into a hospital infant carrier on the bench beside me. Her face was red and wet and furious. She was alive, and she was 3 weeks old, and the woman who had given birth to me had just told a stranger in a rainstorm that she had an event. Claire, the paramedic said, very quietly. Is there anyone else? I closed my eyes. I thought about it for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 seconds, and then I gave him another name. A name I should have given him first. Call my grandfather? I said. Walter Bennett. He's in the contacts under Pop. The paramedic wrote it down. He didn't ask me why I hadn't said it the first time. I think he already knew. My name is Claire Bennett, and I am telling you this story from a hospital bed 2 days after the night I just described, with my daughter asleep in a clear plastic bassinet beside me and a bruise across my collarbone the shape of a seatbelt. I'm 29 years old. I'm a pediatric occupational therapist at a children's hospital in Asheville, North Carolina, which means I spend my working life teaching small children how to hold spoons, how to button shirts, how to make their hands do the things their brains are asking them to do. I am very good at my job. I have always been very good at being useful. My daughter's name is Eleanor. I named her after nobody. Not my mother, whose name is Diane. Not my sister, whose name is Brooke. Not my grandmother, who passed before I was born. I named her after nobody on purpose, because I wanted her to walk into this world without inheriting a single expectation that didn't belong to her. I wanted her name to be hers. I want to stop here for a moment, before I tell you what my grandfather did when he walked through that hospital door at 2 in the morning, and before I tell you what was in the envelope he brought with him 3 days later. Because if I just keep going, you and I are going to miss each other, and I don't want to miss you. So tell me where you're listening from tonight. Are you in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in the Philippines, in Australia, in India, in Kenya, somewhere I haven't named? I want to know. Drop your country in the comments and tell me, honestly, have you ever been the useful child in your family instead of the loved one? The one everyone called when something needed fixing, but nobody called when something needed celebrating. If you have, I want to hear about it. I read the comments. I reply when I can. And if a story like this is the kind of story that finds you at the right time, then stay with me, subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you is only the beginning of what happened in that hospital and what my grandfather had been quietly preparing for 3 years while I had no idea. Now let me take you back. Back to the rain. Back to the paramedic who couldn't quite look at me. Back to the moment I gave him my grandfather's name, and the moment, somewhere across town, that my grandfather answered his phone on the second ring. I grew up in a house that looked, from the street, like the kind of house you'd want to grow up in. White brick, black shutters, a wraparound porch with 2 rocking chairs that nobody ever sat in. My mother kept a wreath on the door for every season, including seasons I'm not entirely sure exist, like late summer and early autumn, which to her required different arrangements of dried wheat. The lawn was cut on Tuesdays. The hedges were trimmed on Fridays. My mother ran a charity board for at-risk youth, and there was a framed photograph in the front hallway of her handing an oversized check to a smiling teenager, whose name she could not remember by the following Sunday. My father, Richard, sold commercial real estate. He was the kind of man who shook hands too long and laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny, because that, he told me once, is how you sell a building. He drove a leased SUV that he replaced every 3 years. He kept his golf clubs in the front hall closet, in front of the coats, so that anyone who came to the door would see them. And then there was Brooke, my younger sister. 2 years younger, 4 inches taller, and somehow, from the moment she could walk, already understood to be the one. The pretty one. The charming one. The one with potential. My mother used to say it out loud, in front of me, without flinching. Brooke has potential. As if I were a piece of furniture that had come with the house, useful but unremarkable, and Brooke were the chandelier. I learned early what my job was. My job was to be the one who handled things. When my mother had a migraine before a fundraiser, I was the one who finalized the seating chart. When my father forgot an anniversary, I was the one who picked up the flowers on the way home from school. When Grandpa Walter had a cardiology appointment, and nobody else could be bothered, I was the one who drove him, sat in the waiting room with a textbook on my lap, and drove him home afterward. I did not resent this at the time. I didn't know I was allowed to. I thought being needed was the same thing as being loved. It took me 25 years and a therapist to learn the difference. At Brooke's 8th birthday party, my mother hired a pony. At my 8th birthday party, my mother forgot to order a cake, and I ate a grocery store cupcake at the kitchen counter while she was on the phone with the country club about a centerpiece. I am not telling you these things to make you feel sorry for me. I am telling you these things because you need to understand the shape of the house I grew up in, so that you understand why, on the night of the accident, I gave the paramedic my mother's number anyway. I had been trained, the way you train a dog, to keep going back to the bowl even when the bowl is empty. There was one person in that house who ever looked at me like I was a whole person. His name was Walter Bennett, my father's father. Grandpa Walter. He had been a civil engineer for 43 years before he retired, and he had built, by his own count, half the bridges in this county and a good number of the on-ramps. He was the kind of man who could look at a piece of land and tell you, without unfolding a single map, how the water would move across it in a hard rain. He wore the same pair of brown work boots for 12 years and resoled them twice. He had a workshop behind his house that smelled like sawdust and pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in 30 years. When I was 12, he found me crying in his garage during a 4th of July party, because Brooke had told the cousins that I was adopted as a joke, and they had all laughed. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He sat down on an overturned bucket next to me, handed me a cold can of ginger ale from the workshop fridge, and said, "Claire, you have an engineer's eyes. You see how things are built. That's a rare thing. Don't let people who can't see what you see tell you what you're worth." I held that sentence the way you hold a candle in a power outage. For years. My mother hated him. I didn't understand why for a long time. She'd smile at him at Thanksgiving and then complain about him in the car on the way home. She called him stubborn. She called him old-fashioned. She called him once, when she thought I wasn't listening, the only thing standing in the way. I didn't know what that meant. I do now. Because what Grandpa Walter had, that my mother wanted, was money. Not flashy money. Engineer money. 43 years of pension and patents and a paid-off house on 6 acres and a brokerage account he had quietly fed for half a century. And what Grandpa Walter also had, that my mother could not stand, was the ability to see me. Really see me. Which meant that as long as he was alive, and as long as he was watching, there was someone in the family who knew the difference between the useful daughter and the loved one. He knew. He had always known. And, as I would find out in a hospital room 3 weeks after my daughter was born, he had been doing something about it for 3 years. I met Mark Whitfield at a hospital fundraiser my mother dragged me to when I was 26. He was a finance associate at a firm with a name that sounded like 3 last names stapled together, and he had the kind of face that photographs well from any angle. My mother spotted him before I did. I watched her recalibrate across the room, shoulders back, smile sharpened, and steer him toward me with the precision of a woman docking a yacht. "Claire," she said, "this is Mark. Mark's family has the place out on Lake Lure." That was how my mother introduced people. Not by what they did, by what they had. Mark was charming. I am not going to pretend he wasn't. He remembered the names of the nurses I worked with. He sent flowers to my apartment after our second date. He asked me about my patients, about the kids I worked with, about the parents who broke down in the therapy room when their child managed, for the first time, to grip a crayon. He listened, or he performed listening, which, when you have been starved of attention your whole life, is almost indistinguishable from the real thing. We were engaged within a year. My mother planned the engagement party before I had finished telling her about the proposal. Brooke, who was then 24 and between jobs, was named the maid of honor by default, because, my mother said, it would be cruel not to. I was happy. Or I thought I was. Which is a sentence I am going to stop saying about myself, because I have said it too many times in my life. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday in February. I told Mark on a Wednesday. By Friday, he had stopped answering his phone. He came to the apartment on Saturday morning, sat on the edge of the couch like a man who didn't want to wrinkle his pants, and told me that the timing wasn't right. That he wasn't ready. That he needed space. That he hoped I would understand. He used the word pressure 4 times. He did not use the word baby once. He was gone within the hour. He moved to Charlotte within the month. I did not hear from him again until the lawyers got involved, and by then, none of it was about him anymore. I would find out later, much later, what had actually happened. What had actually happened was that my mother had called Mark on the Wednesday I told him. What had actually happened was that my mother had sat across from him at a coffee shop on Thursday morning and explained to him, in the calm, smiling tone she reserved for charity board meetings, that the pregnancy was not, in her phrase, the right timing for the family brand. That Brooke was about to get engaged to the son of a state senator. That a single, pregnant older sister, especially one whose fiancé would be visibly trapped, would complicate the optics. That she was prepared to make it worth his while to step back, quietly, and let me believe he had simply lost his nerve. She wrote him a check. I don't know the exact figure yet at this point in the story. I will know it, in writing, in about 5 chapters. But she wrote him a check and he took it, and he left. And my mother smiled at me across the kitchen table the following week and said, "Sweetheart, men show you who they are. Better now than later." She said it while pouring me a cup of decaffeinated tea. I moved out of the apartment Mark and I had shared and into a small rental closer to the hospital. I worked until I was 36 weeks pregnant. I went to my doctor's appointments alone. I assembled the crib alone. I read every book about postpartum recovery alone, highlighting things I wanted to remember, dog-earing pages I wanted to come back to. I told myself that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I told myself a lot of things, that year, that weren't true. My mother offered, once, in a tone that suggested the matter was already settled, to host my baby shower. At her country club, with her friends. With Brooke as co-host. I said yes, because I did not know how to say no to her, and because some small, stupid, still hoping part of me thought maybe this was the thing that would crack her open. Maybe a grandchild would be the thing. 2 weeks before the shower, she called me to say the venue had double booked. There was nothing to be done. We would have to cancel. She was so sorry, sweetheart, these things happen. I canceled. I called the women I worked with. I told them I was sorry. I cried in the supply closet at the hospital for 10 minutes on my lunch break, and then I washed my face, and I went and helped a 4-year-old learn how to hold a fork. That Saturday, the day my shower would have been, I was scrolling through my phone and I saw it. A photograph my cousin had tagged me in by accident. Brooke, in a cream silk dress, at the country club, in the exact ballroom my shower had been booked in. Champagne flutes. A floral arch. A banner that said Brooke and Cameron, engaged. My mother in the background, laughing, holding a glass. I sat on the floor of my apartment. I didn't cry. I had run out of crying. I was still sitting there an hour later when there was a knock on my door. It was Grandpa Walter. He was standing on my doormat with a wooden cradle in his arms, hand-built, sanded smooth, smelling of cedar. There was an envelope tucked into the mattress with a check in it for an amount I did not look at until much later. He set the cradle down inside my apartment. He took off his hat. He looked around at the unwrapped boxes from the registry, and the unhung curtains, and the woman sitting on the floor in sweatpants in the middle of all of it. He sat down on the floor next to me. He didn't try to hug me. He just sat. "You're not alone, kiddo," he said. "Don't you ever think that again." Eleanor was born 3 weeks later. The accident was 3 weeks after that. The hospital they took me to that night was the same hospital I worked at. I want you to understand that. The same hallways I walked every weekday in soft-soled shoes, carrying laminated picture cards and weighted spoons, were the hallways they wheeled me down on a stretcher at 11:43 at night with my daughter screaming somewhere behind me. The nurses on the floor knew me. One of them, a woman named Renata who had worked the pediatric wing for 18 years and had brought me a coffee my first week on the job, was the one who took Eleanor out of the paramedic's arms. I remember her face. I remember the way she said, "Oh, honey," not to me, to my daughter. The way she said it, the way you'd say it if a child you loved had skinned her knee. I remember thinking, even through the fog, that this was the first time in 3 weeks anyone in a position of authority had held my daughter and looked at her like she was precious. They took me into a trauma bay. They cut my shirt off. They asked me, in the careful, looping way they ask you these things, whether I knew what year it was, whether I knew the name of the president, whether I could feel them touching my feet. I could. I told them I was an OT. I told them I knew the drill. The resident smiled at me. He had kind eyes. He told me I had a concussion, a hairline fracture in my left clavicle, and a seatbelt contusion that was going to hurt worse tomorrow than it did tonight. He told me Eleanor was perfect. He used that word. Perfect, he said. The rear-facing seat had done exactly what it was designed to do. I asked about my mother. He looked at the chart. He looked at Renata. Renata looked at the floor. "Claire," she said gently, "the paramedic noted that your emergency contact wasn't available tonight. He noted you gave a second contact. Your grandfather? We've reached him. He's on his way." "My mother?" I said. "She's not coming, sweetheart," Renata said. There is a particular kind of silence that lives in a hospital at midnight. It is not actually silent. There is the soft beep of monitors, and the distant murmur of a television in a waiting room, and somewhere down the hall a phone ringing that nobody is going to answer for a few rings. But it is a silence that wraps around you, that makes you feel like the only person in the world who is awake, the only person in the world to whom this particular thing is happening. I lay there in that silence, with a fractured collarbone and a daughter in a bassinet beside me, and a hospital gown that smelled like industrial detergent. And I understood, all the way down, for the first time in my life, what I had been refusing to understand for 29 years. My mother was not going to come. My mother was never going to come. My mother had heard from a paramedic in a rainstorm that her daughter had been in a car accident with her 3-week-old granddaughter, and her response had been to ask whether I was going to live, and then to decline. To decline. The way you decline an invitation to a wedding you don't feel like attending. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I did not cry in that moment because I had run out of the part of me that still believed crying would change anything. I asked Renata to bring Eleanor closer to my bed. She did. She tucked the bassinet right up against the rail, so close that I could reach my good arm through, and put a finger against my daughter's cheek. Eleanor's eyes were closed. Her mouth was working at nothing. the way newborns' mouths do in their sleep, like they're rehearsing for a meal that hasn't arrived yet. I watched her breathe. I told her, in my head, I will never do to you what she just did to me. I will never. I will never. I will never. I said it like a prayer. I said it like a vow. I said it until I fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of footsteps I recognized. It was a few minutes after 2 in the morning. The hallway lights had been dimmed to the night setting, the way they dim them on the inpatient floors so that the patients can sleep. The door to my room was open, and in the doorway, in a wet wool coat that was dripping onto the linoleum, holding my daughter against his chest like a man who had been waiting his entire life to be allowed to do this, was my grandfather. He had taken her out of the bassinet. I don't know how he had gotten past the nurse's station with her, but he had, and they had let him, because he was Walter Bennett, and Walter Bennett, when he wanted to, could move through a hospital the way water moves through a culvert he had personally designed. He came over to the bed. He sat down in the visitor's chair without taking his coat off. He didn't speak for a long minute. He just looked at me. He looked at me the way you look at someone you've been worried about for a very long time, and are finally getting to see with your own eyes. Then he looked down at Eleanor, asleep against his shoulder, and he said, very quietly, in a voice that didn't shake but also didn't try not to shake, I have been waiting 20 years for your mother to show me who she really is. Tonight, she did. And I am so sorry, kiddo, that it had to be you and this baby that finally made her do it. I started crying then. Not the way I'd cried before. A different way. The way you cry when somebody finally, says the thing out loud that you have known your whole life and never been allowed to name. He didn't put Eleanor down. He shifted her to one arm, and he reached across the bed rail with the other, and he took my hand. His hand was cold from the rain and warm underneath, the way his hands had always been. There is something, he said, that I need to show you. Not tonight. You sleep tonight. But in a few days, when you're stronger, I need to show you something that I have been keeping for you for 3 years. Do you understand me, Claire? I nodded. I didn't, yet, but I would. 3 years, he said again. And he sat there, in the dripping coat, holding my daughter, holding my hand, until the sun came up. 2 days later, I was sitting up in a different room. They had moved me from the trauma floor to a regular post, op bed, when my grandfather came in with a woman I had never met before. She was somewhere in her 50s, with steel, gray hair cut blunt to her chin, a charcoal pantsuit, and reading glasses on a thin gold chain around her neck. She carried a leather portfolio under her arm and a paper coffee cup in each hand. She handed one of the cups to me without asking what I took in it. Black with 1 sugar, she said. Walter told me. Claire? My grandfather said, this is Theresa Hoyt. Theresa is my attorney. She has been my attorney for 11 years. I trust her the way I trust the foundation of my own house. I'd like for her to be your attorney too, if you'll have her, and I'd like for her to tell you some things now that I should have told you a long time ago. Is that all right? I looked at him. I looked at her. I looked at Eleanor, asleep in the bassinet beside the bed in a pink hospital cap that was already too small for her head. It's all right, I said. Theresa pulled up the second visitor's chair and sat. She set the portfolio on the rolling bedside table. She did not open it right away. Claire, she said, before I show you what is in this folder, I need to tell you 3 things. The first is that nothing in here is a surprise to your grandfather. He has known about all of it. The second is that nothing in here is going to be a surprise to you, exactly either. You have known some version of all of it your whole life. What's going to be new is the paper. The third thing is that you do not have to do anything with what I'm about to show you. Your grandfather and I have an opinion about what should happen next. But the choice is yours. Do you understand? I nodded. My good hand was already shaking around the coffee cup. She opened the portfolio. The first document she slid across the table was a bank statement. It was from one of my grandfather's brokerage accounts. There was a withdrawal highlighted in yellow, dated about 3 years earlier, for $62,000. The authorization signature at the bottom was my grandfather's. Or it looked like my grandfather's. To me, it looked exactly like his. That isn't my signature, he said quietly. I was in the hospital recovering from a triple bypass the day that withdrawal was authorized. I was on a ventilator. I could not have signed anything. Theresa slid another statement across. Another highlighted withdrawal. 41,000. Then another. 28. Then another. 18. Then a transfer, larger than the rest, $340,000, marked as a loan, to a commercial entity I recognized as the holding company my father used to manage his real estate firm. $340,000. Theresa said, was transferred from your grandfather's principal account to your father's firm 2.5 years ago. The signature authorizing that transfer is also not your grandfather's. Your father's firm was facing a liquidity crisis at the time. They had overextended on a strip mall development in Hendersonville that was not leasing. Without that transfer, the firm would have failed. The transfer has not been repaid. The firm has, instead, transferred additional small sums back to your mother's personal accounts over the last 2 years, in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold. I was reading the documents. I could not stop reading the documents. The numbers kept getting larger, and my hand kept shaking harder, and Eleanor, in the bassinet, made a small sound in her sleep that brought me back into the room every few seconds. My mother's personal account? I said. Yes, not the joint account. No, her individual account. I looked at my grandfather. He was looking at the floor. There's more, he said. Theresa took out a small handheld recorder. She set it on the table. She looked at me with something that was not quite an apology but was close to one. This is a voicemail, she said, that your sister Brooke left on your mother's phone approximately 14 months ago. The phone was on the kitchen island. Your grandfather was at the house for Sunday dinner. He overheard the message playing. He was able to obtain a copy through means I will not go into on the record, but which are legally usable. I am going to play it for you now. It is 22 seconds long. Are you ready? I nodded. I was not ready. She pressed the button. My sister's voice came out of the speaker, light and bored and casual, the way she sounded when she was bored and casual, which was most of the time. Hey, Mom. I talked to Cam's dad. He says the senator thing is basically a lock if we keep the optics clean through November. So just keep doing what you're doing, okay? Claire and the baby aren't part of the plan. Don't make them part of the plan. Love you. Bye. The recorder clicked off. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Theresa took one more document out of the folder, a thicker one, stapled, 12 pages. She slid it across the table to me, and she put her hand flat on top of it for a moment before she let me see it. This, she said, is the draft of an amendment to your grandfather's revocable trust. It has not been signed. He has been waiting to sign it until he could sit down with you and explain it. It names you as sole heir to his estate. It removes your father, your mother, and your sister from any beneficiary position. It establishes a trust for Eleanor for her education and care. And it has one condition attached, which he wants to talk to you about himself. I looked at my grandfather. He was finally looking at me again. What's the condition? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He stood up from the chair, walked to the window, and looked out at the parking lot below for what felt like a long time. The light coming through the blinds put stripes across his face. He looked older in that light than I had ever seen him. The condition, he said, without turning around, is that you let me tell them. All of them. In a room. With witnesses. With Theresa present. With the paper on the table. I don't want this handled quietly. I don't want this handled in a way that lets your mother walk out of a lawyer's office in 3 years and tell people at her church that there was some kind of misunderstanding. I want this on the record. I want your father's name attached to a civil filing. I want your mother's voice on that recorder played in front of her own brothers. I want the people who refused my great-granddaughter in a rainstorm to be refused, in turn, by every door they have spent 40 years walking through. He turned around then. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. He had the look on his face I had seen, once. When I was 16 and we had driven past a bridge he had designed and a truck had hit the guardrail he had specified and the guardrail had held. It was not satisfaction. It was something quieter and more permanent than that. It was the look of a man who had built the thing right. And the thing had done what it was built to do. I am 81 years old, Claire, he said. My cardiologist tells me I have somewhere between 2 and 10 more years, and he won't give me a tighter window than that. I am not going to spend any of those years pretending I don't know what your parents are. And I am not going to leave you alone with them after I'm gone, holding a piece of paper they will spend the rest of their lives trying to break. If we do this, we do it now, while I am alive, while I can sit in the room, while my signature on the amendment is unimpeachable. If you say no, I will respect that. I will still leave you everything. but it will be harder for you, after I'm gone, than it needs to be. That is the condition. I want you to think about it. I want you to take the night. I don't want an answer right now. I took the night. I lay in that hospital bed with Eleanor's bassinet pulled up against the rail. And I thought about every birthday cake I had not been given, and every appointment I had driven my grandfather to, and every Christmas morning Brooke had opened twice as many presents as I had, and every time my mother had said sweetheart, in a tone that made the word sound like a leash. I thought about Mark, sitting on my couch, saying the word pressure. I thought about my mother writing him a check. I thought about Brooke's voice on the recorder. Claire and the baby aren't part of the plan. I thought about my daughter. I thought about what kind of woman I wanted her to grow up watching. I didn't want her to grow up watching a woman who kept going back to an empty bowl. In the morning, when my grandfather came back into the room with 2 paper cups of coffee, I told him yes. He nodded once, set the coffee down on the table, and said, "All right then, kiddo. Let's go to work." What followed was 3 weeks that I remember now in the clean, almost surgical way you remember the days after you have finally made a decision you should have made years earlier. Theresa came to the hospital twice more before I was discharged. She brought a yellow legal pad and a list of questions. She wanted to know everything. She wanted dates. She wanted names. She wanted the address of the coffee shop where my mother had met Mark, which I did not know, but which a friend of mine who had seen them there did. She wanted the name of my OB, who had documented in my chart that I had attended every prenatal appointment alone. She wanted the name of the venue where my shower had supposedly been double booked and the name of the event coordinator there, whom Theresa called personally and who, after a brief and very polite conversation, confirmed that there had been no double booking, that my mother had canceled my event and rebooked it under Brooke's name, and that she had the emails to prove it. We obtained, through entirely legal channels, the dispatch record of the 911 call from the night of the accident, including the audio of the paramedic's call to my mother's phone. We obtained a written statement from the paramedic himself, who, it turned out, was named Daniel, and who, it turned out, had a daughter of his own and had been thinking about that night ever since. We obtained, through a forensic accountant Theresa retained, a complete trace of the settlement check my mother had written to Mark, from her personal account at a regional bank, deposited into his account at a different regional bank, dated 4 days after I had told him I was pregnant. The amount was $75,000. $75,000 to make my daughter's father disappear. And we obtained, from a cousin of mine named Lindsay, who had been Brooke's bridesmaid in the engagement and had grown sick of watching what our family did to me, a folder of text messages between Brooke and my mother going back 2 years. The messages were, in some places, mundane. In other places, they were not. In one of them, my mother referred to me, by name, as the unfortunate one. In another, Brooke asked, in a thread about Christmas seating, whether they really had to invite me. In another, sent the morning after the accident, my mother wrote, "Handled it. Don't worry. The hospital won't be a problem." I read that one twice. Then I forwarded it to Theresa. We did not file anything yet. We did not call anyone. We did not warn anyone. We sat on all of it, quietly, the way my grandfather had sat on it for 3 years. And then Theresa, through entirely ordinary channels, sent a calendar invitation to my parents and my sister and 2 of my father's brothers, for what was described as a routine review of my grandfather's estate planning, to be held in her downtown conference room on a Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. They accepted. I arrived at Theresa's office at 9:30. Eleanor was asleep in a soft gray car seat carrier, dressed in a white onesie embroidered with small yellow ducks. I had timed her last feeding so that, with luck, she would sleep through the entire meeting. I had also packed 2 backup outfits, a bottle, a pacifier, and a small muslin blanket, because, with newborns, you do not actually plan, you only prepare. Theresa's office was on the 7th floor of a brick building downtown, with tall windows that looked out across the rooftops toward the mountains. The conference room had a long oak table, 12 leather chairs, a credenza with a coffee service on it, and a small projection screen at one end. Theresa was already there. So was my grandfather. He had on a charcoal suit I had never seen him wear before, and a navy tie, and his good brown shoes, polished. He looked like a man who had been getting ready for this morning for a very long time. He stood up when I came in. He kissed the top of Eleanor's head through the carrier. He pulled out the chair to his right and patted it. I sat down. Theresa, at the head of the table, slid a folder in front of me that was twin to the ones she had stacked at every other seat. 8 folders. 8 chairs. They're downstairs, she said, looking at her phone. Security just buzzed them up. My grandfather took my hand under the table. He did not squeeze it. He just held it. The door opened. My mother came in first. She was wearing a cream wool coat and pearl earrings and the smile she wore to charity functions, which is to say, the smile that did not involve her eyes. Behind her was my father, in a gray suit, holding his phone in one hand and a leather portfolio in the other, looking, as he always did, like a man who was already late for somewhere else. Behind him was Brooke, in a camel-colored blazer, her hair freshly blown out, the way she always wore it for occasions she considered worth her time. And behind Brooke were my father's 2 younger brothers, my uncles, Daniel and Paul, both of whom looked confused to be there at all. My mother saw me first. Her smile did not change, but her eyes moved, down to Eleanor, back up to my face, then to my grandfather, then to Theresa, then to the folders on the table. I watched her brain do the math in approximately 1 second, and I watched her decide, in approximately 1 more, that she could still control the room. Claire, she said warmly. Sweetheart, I didn't know you were going to be here. I asked her to come. My grandfather said. He did not stand. He did not return her smile. Of course, my mother said. She slid into the chair across from me. My father sat next to her. Brooke sat next to him. My uncles took the 2 seats at the far end of the table. There was an empty chair between Brooke and my uncle Daniel that nobody filled. Theresa waited until everyone had set their things down. Then she opened her own folder, and she began in a voice that was very even and very clear. Thank you all for coming, she said. As you know, Walter has been working with my office on a review of his estate planning. He has asked me to present some materials to you this morning, and to answer any questions you may have. Please open the folder in front of you. Begin with the first tab. I watched my mother's hand reach for her folder. I watched her open it. I watched her eyes drop to the first document. It was the highlighted bank statement. The one with the forged signature. The $62,000 withdrawal made the day my grandfather was on a ventilator. I watched the color leave her face the way water leaves a sink when the drain finally opens. She turned the page. Another statement. 41,000. She turned the page. Another. 28. She turned the page. The transfer. $340,000 to my father's holding company. My father, beside her, had stopped looking at his phone. He was staring at the document the way a man stares at a diagnosis. This is, my mother began. Please turn to the second tab, Theresa said. The second tab was the forensic accountant's report. 12 pages. Color-coded, every transfer traced, every shell account named, every dollar accounted for. The small payments back to my mother's personal account, in amounts of $9,800, $9,400, $9,600, were listed in a clean column on page 7. My Uncle Paul, at the end of the table, was reading that page with his glasses pushed down to the end of his nose. This is a misunderstanding, my mother said. Her voice had climbed half an octave. Walter, what is this? Why would you? Please turn to the third tab, Theresa said. The third tab was the venue email, the canceled baby shower, the rebooked engagement brunch. Brooke, beside my father, made a small sound that was not quite a word. Please turn to the fourth tab. The fourth tab was the trace of the settlement check. $75,000. My mother's account. Mark Whitfield's account. 4 days after I told him I was pregnant. My father turned to look at my mother. My mother did not turn to look at him. She was still staring at the folder. Please turn to the fifth tab. The fifth tab was the transcript of the paramedic's call. My mother's exact words, in print, on company letterhead. I can't come tonight. I have an event. I can't take the baby either. Try someone else. My Uncle Daniel set his folder down. He pushed it slightly away from him, the way you push a plate away when you are finished with a meal you did not enjoy. Diane, he said quietly, is this real? My mother did not answer. Theresa reached down beside her chair, and she set the small handheld recorder on the table. This, she said, is a voicemail left by Brooke on Diane's phone 14 months ago. It is 22 seconds long. She pressed the button. My sister's voice came out of the speaker, in that conference room, with the morning light coming through the tall windows, with my daughter asleep in the carrier at my feet, with my uncles sitting at the end of the table, with my mother's pearl earrings catching the light. Hey, Mom, I talked to Cam's dad. He says the senator thing is basically a lock if we keep the optics clean through November. So just keep doing what you're doing, okay? Claire and the baby aren't part of the plan. Don't make them part of the plan. Love you. Bye. The recorder clicked off. The room went silent. I do not mean it went quiet. I mean it went silent, in the way a room goes silent when something inside it has died, and everyone in the room is still deciding whether to acknowledge it. My mother stood up. She said, this is a manipulation. This is an old man's confusion. Walter, you are not well. You have not been well. I have been telling everyone. Sit down, Diane. My grandfather said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She sat down. He stood up then. He buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at every person in the room, one at a time, ending with my mother. I am reclaiming every dollar that was taken from my accounts without my authorization, he said. The civil complaint has already been filed with the Buncombe County Clerk's office. It was filed this morning at 8:45. The forgery evidence has already been forwarded to the district attorney. Theresa has the receipt. I am also signing, today, in this room, in front of all of you as witnesses, an amendment to my trust naming my granddaughter Claire as sole heir of my estate, with a separate provision for the care and education of my great-granddaughter Eleanor. Richard, Diane. Brooke, you are removed. You will receive nothing. You are not to contact Claire or Eleanor without her written permission. If you do, Theresa will know about it within the hour. He looked at my mother for a long moment. You refused my great-granddaughter at a hospital in a rainstorm because you had an event, he said. I am refusing you now. He sat down. He picked up the pen Theresa had laid in front of him. He signed the amendment. He passed it to me. I signed where Theresa pointed. She countersigned. She slid 2 notarized copies into a manila envelope and handed it to me. Nobody at the table moved. My Uncle Daniel, finally very quietly, said, I think we should leave. My mother stood up. Her hand was shaking. She did not look at me. She did not look at Eleanor. She walked out of the conference room without saying a word. My father followed her. Brooke, halfway to the door, turned back, opened her mouth, and then closed it again, and left. My uncles came around the table, both of them, and each of them, in turn, put a hand on my shoulder. Neither of them said anything. They didn't have to. When the door closed behind them, my grandfather exhaled, a long, slow breath I think he had been holding for 3 years, and he looked down at Eleanor, who had slept through all of it. All right then, kiddo, he said. Let's go home. The first thing that happened was the audit. Theresa's civil filing, by itself, would have moved slowly. Civil cases in North Carolina, like civil cases everywhere, move at the pace of paperwork, which is to say, at the pace of a man walking through wet sand. But the forgery referral to the district attorney moved faster, because forgery is a felony, and because the evidence Theresa handed over was, in her own quiet phrase, tatty. Within 10 days, an investigator from the DA's office had subpoenaed records from 3 banks. Within 3 weeks, those records had been cross-referenced with my father's commercial filings. Within 5 weeks, my father's holding company was under a formal financial audit by the state, and his lender, a regional bank he had been carrying loans with for 2 decades, had frozen his line of credit pending the outcome. My father's firm collapsed in 7 weeks. I did not learn this from him. I did not learn it from my mother. I learned it from the business section of the local paper, which I read on a Tuesday morning at my kitchen table, while Eleanor practiced lifting her head off a play mat on the floor beside me. The article was small. 2 paragraphs. It said that Bennett Commercial Holdings had filed for Chapter 7 liquidation, that several pending deals had been abandoned, and that the principal, Richard Bennett, had been unavailable for comment. I read the article twice. I drank my coffee. Eleanor made a small triumphant sound on the playmat, because she had succeeded, for approximately 2 seconds, in pushing herself up onto her forearms. I went down on the floor next to her and told her she was the strongest girl in the world. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vengeful. I did not even feel sad. I felt the way you feel when you have been carrying a heavy box up a long flight of stairs, and you finally set it down at the top, and your shoulders are sore, and your hands are red, and the box is no longer your problem. I felt set down. I felt for the first time in 29 years, set down. My mother's fall was slower and, in its own way, more public. The charity board she had chaired for 11 years held an emergency session in the second week, after the audit became public. I learned this from a friend of mine whose mother sat on the board. They voted, unanimously, to ask my mother to step down, pending the resolution of unrelated personal matters. She refused, at first. Then the foundation's largest donor, a man whose name was on the side of the children's wing at the hospital where I worked, sent a letter saying that he would be withdrawing his support if my mother remained associated with the organization. She resigned the next morning. The press release was 3 sentences long. Brooks' engagement to the senator's son ended 4 days after that. I do not know the details. I do not need to. I saw the announcement in the same local paper in the same small font, 2 paragraphs in the back. The families have mutually agreed to part ways. The senator's office issued a statement praising both families and wishing everyone well. The wedding photographer, who had already been booked, sent Brooke a refund check minus a cancellation fee. The country club, where my baby shower had not been held, quietly did not renew my parents' membership for the following year. The country club did not issue a statement about this. The country club did not have to. My mother called me 17 times. I want to be precise about that number, because I counted it later, when I went through the voicemail transcripts Theresa had set up for me to receive, in writing without ever having to hear my mother's actual voice. 17 calls over the course of 6 weeks. The first 3 were angry. Claire, you have to call me back, that this is absurd, this has gone too far. The next 4 were bargaining. Claire, sweetheart, I think we can find a way through this if we just sit down together. The next 5 were tearful. Claire, I'm your mother, I am your mother, please. The last 5 were quiet. Claire, I don't know what else to say. Please call me. I did not call her back. I did not write to her. I did not block her number, because Theresa had advised me to keep the line open for documentation purposes, but I also did not listen to a single one of those messages in real time. I let them pile up in a transcript folder in an email account that Theresa monitored. I read them once in a single sitting, on a Sunday afternoon, with a cup of tea and Eleanor napping on my chest. I did not feel anything I had not expected to feel. I forwarded the folder to Theresa when I was done. She acknowledged receipt. We did not discuss it. My father wrote me one letter. It was 3 pages long. It was handwritten on the cream stationery he kept in his desk for thank you notes. It was, in places, a real letter. In other places, it was a request for money. He said he was sorry. He said he had not known the extent of what my mother had done. He said he loved me, and he said he had always loved me. And then, on the second page, he asked me whether the trust amendment my grandfather had signed might contain any provision for family hardship. I read that sentence 3 times. I read the rest of the letter once. I put it in a manila folder labeled Richard, and I put the folder in a drawer, and I closed the drawer, and I did not open it again. I did not write him back. The silence, I had come to understand, was the answer. The silence was the most honest answer I had ever given them. My grandfather's house sat on 6 acres at the end of a gravel road outside Asheville, in a clearing surrounded by hardwoods that turned the color of a struck match every October. He had built the house himself in 1971, with his own hands and the help of a man named Earl who had since passed. The house was cedar, shingled and low-slung, with a wide porch on 3 sides and a stone chimney he had laid 1 rock at a time. It was the kind of house that did not look impressive from the road but that you understood, the moment you stepped inside, had been built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He converted his study into a nursery for Eleanor. I want to tell you about that, because it was the moment I understood that what was happening to me was real, and not a thing I was going to wake up from. He moved every book and every blueprint and every framed photograph out of that room over the course of 3 weekends. He repainted the walls a pale, soft green that he had picked from a paint chip he had carried in his wallet for weeks. He built, by hand, in his workshop behind the house, a low bookshelf, a small dresser, a rocking chair, and a changing table sized exactly to the height of his own hips, because, he said, his back was not what it used to be, and he intended to be the one changing her at least some of the time. He put up curtains his late wife, my grandmother whom I never met, had embroidered with small white flowers 50 years earlier, and that he had kept folded in a cedar chest the entire time. When I walked into that room for the first time, with Eleanor on my hip, I did not cry. I had cried enough by then. I just stood in the doorway and looked at it, and my grandfather, behind me, said very softly, "Is it all right? I wasn't sure about the green." "It's perfect, Pop," I said. It is the most perfect room I have ever seen. We moved in 3 weeks after that. I gave up the rental near the hospital. I sold the wrecked sedan to a salvage yard for less than I had paid for the tires. I packed Eleanor's things and my things into the back of my grandfather's old pickup truck, and we drove the 20 minutes out of town with the windows down and the smell of cut grass coming in off the fields. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the neighbor from down the road, a woman named Mrs. Pemberton, whom my grandfather had known for 32 years, was sitting on the porch with a casserole dish on her lap and a paperback novel open beside her. She stood up when she saw us. She did not say anything. She just came over and took the casserole inside and set it on the kitchen counter, and came back out and held Eleanor while I unloaded the truck. She had been a labor and delivery nurse for 41 years. She held Eleanor the way a person holds a baby when they have held thousands of babies, and have never once gotten tired of the holding. That was the first day. The second day, two of the women I worked with at the hospital drove out with a stroller they had pooled money to buy, and a meal train sign-up sheet, and a stuffed rabbit for Eleanor that had a small embroidered name tag that said Ellie. The third day, Theresa called to tell me that the trust had funded and that I was, as of that morning, no longer required to think about money for the foreseeable future. The fourth day, my grandfather taught me the names of the 4 birds that came to the feeder outside the kitchen window: Carolina chickadee, tufted titmouse, white-breasted nuthatch, eastern bluebird. I wrote them down on an index card and stuck the card to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a peach. A small, real life began to assemble itself around me. Not loudly. Not in a way that anyone outside of it would have noticed, but in the way that a fire assembles itself, one piece of kindling at a time, until at some point, without quite knowing when it happened, you realize you are warm. Eleanor said her first word at 13 months and 4 days. She said it on a Tuesday morning, sitting in her high chair at the kitchen table, with a piece of banana in one hand and a spoon she was not using in the other. My grandfather was at the counter pouring himself a cup of coffee. He had his back to her. She was watching him. She said, "Pop." He did not turn around right away. I think he did not believe what he had heard. She said it again. "Pop." Louder, pleased with herself, banging the spoon on the tray for emphasis. He set the coffee pot down. He turned around. His face did a thing I had never seen his face do in 29 years of knowing him. It came apart, and then it came back together, and then it came apart again. He walked over to the high chair. He bent down. He put his forehead, very gently, against hers. "Hi, sweet pea," he said. I wrote it in the journal I had started keeping for her, the date, the word. The way the light came in through the kitchen window, the way my grandfather's hand shook a little when he picked up his coffee cup afterward. I went back to work part-time 2 weeks later. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Ramona who specialized in adult children of high-conflict families, and I sat on her couch every other Wednesday and said, slowly, out loud, things I had not let myself say out loud before. I let my breath out. I let the secrets go. I let the shame of being useful dissolve into the simple, quiet joy of being present. In Ramona's office, I learned that a boundary isn't a weapon. It's a fence you build around a garden so the deer don't eat the flowers. My mother had spent my whole life convincing me that fences were an insult to the people standing outside them. Ramona helped me see that the fence was the only thing that made the garden possible. I returned to the hospital 3 days a week. It was different now. I wasn't the woman hiding in the supply closet anymore. I was the woman who walked into the pediatric wing knowing exactly what I was worth, because I had a house to go home to where that worth was never questioned. My coworkers noticed. Renata told me, over a lukewarm coffee in the break room, that I looked like I'd finally stopped holding my breath. "You look like you've come home to yourself, Claire," she said. I realized then that she was right. For 29 years, I had lived in a house that was technically mine, but I had never lived inside my own skin. I had been an inhabitant of my mother's expectations. Now, I was a resident of my own life. The open loop of my family remained, but the gravity of it was failing. I heard through the grapevine that my father was working for a former rival, a man who had once been his golf partner and was now his boss. My mother had retreated into a smaller circle of friends, women who didn't ask questions about why she no longer sat on boards. Brooke was living in a townhome 3 cities away, working in a boutique, her potential, still a dormant seed in a neglected pot. I didn't wish them ill. I just didn't wish them anything. The door was closing, not because I was slamming it in a fit of rage, but because the wind was blowing from a different direction. I was moving forward, and they were staying where they had always been, in a house made of white brick and black shutters, and a coldness that no amount of dried wheat wreaths could ever warm. A year passed in the rhythm of seasons. The hardwoods turned to fire and then to bone. The snow covered the gravel road, and then the spring rains washed it away to reveal the green again. Eleanor grew. She learned to run on the wide porch. She learned to help Pop fix things in the workshop with a plastic hammer. And as the first anniversary of the accident approached, I realized I was ready to do the one thing I hadn't yet found the words for. I was ready to say goodbye, not just in silence, but in a way that made the silence permanent. The letter was not long. I wrote it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, while the sun was dipping below the ridge, and the kitchen was filled with the smell of my grandfather's roast chicken. Eleanor was asleep. My grandfather was in his workshop, the soft orange glow of his lamp visible through the window. I used the same cream stationery my father had used to write to me a year ago, but I didn't use his looping, performative script. I wrote in my own hand, plain and steady. I am writing this to tell you that I am safe, and that Eleanor is happy, I began. I am also writing this to tell you that I am no longer waiting for an apology. I realized a few months ago that even if you gave me one, I wouldn't have a place to put it. Our lives have moved into different rooms. I didn't list their crimes. I didn't mention the $75,000 my mother had paid Mark, or the forged signatures, or the optics of a senator's son. They knew what they had done. Telling them again would only give them another chance to deny it, and I was finished with their denials. You taught me that I was only valuable when I was useful, I wrote. I want you to know that I have found a place where I am valuable just for being Claire. Because of that, I have to keep the door closed. I don't hate you. I just don't know you anymore. Please don't write back. There is no one here to receive the reply. I folded the paper, slipped it into the envelope, and licked the seal. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I didn't feel the sharp sting of tears. I felt the quiet, heavy click of a lock sliding into place. I walked to the end of the gravel driveway the next morning and put the letter in the mailbox. I lifted the red flag. As I walked back toward the house, I saw Eleanor standing at the screen door, her small hands pressed against the mesh. She saw me and grinned, a wide, toothy expression that reached all the way to her eyes. "Mama?" she shouted. "I'm coming, Ellie," I said, and I realized it was true. I was finally fully there. My philosophy of love had changed. I used to think love was a performance, something you earned by being the smartest, the prettiest, or the most helpful person in the room. I thought love was a transaction, but watching my grandfather hold Eleanor, or seeing him leave a single cup of coffee on the nightstand for me every morning, I realized that real love is a witness. It's someone standing in the doorway and saying, "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." The boundaries are not walls. They are the limits of where you end and someone else begins. My mother had no end. She tried to consume everyone around her to fill the hollow spaces in herself. I had finally found my edges. I was solid now. I spent that afternoon in the garden with Pop. He was teaching me how to prune the roses, showing me where to cut so the new growth would have room to breathe. "You have to be brave with the shears, Claire," he said, his voice gravelly and kind. "If you're too afraid to cut away the dead weight, the whole bush suffers. You have to choose the life you want to keep." "I've chosen it, Pop," I said, looking at the house, the light catching the windows, the little girl laughing inside. "I've chosen it. The door is closed now, but it isn't locked with a key of bitterness. It's just closed because there is nothing left on the other side that I need. I am a woman who was built in the shadows, but I have learned to live in the light. I am a mother who was raised by a woman who chose optics over blood. And because of that, I am a mother who will always choose my daughter over everything. I know some of you watching this might be in your own white brick house right now. You might be the useful child, the one who handles the seating charts and the migraines and the heart itches while waiting for a sweetheart that never feels quite real. You might be afraid that if you stop being useful, you will stop being loved. I am here to tell you that the bowl isn't empty because you haven't filled it enough. It's empty because you're at the wrong table. There is a house with light in it waiting for you. You might have to build it yourself, rock by stone, Or you might find it at the end of a gravel road with an old man and a cedar workshop. But you have to be brave enough to put the shears to the dead weight. You have to be brave enough to choose the ending you want. If this story has touched a part of your own journey, if you've ever had to close a door to save yourself, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. We are a chosen family here, and your story matters as much as mine. Thank you for walking through these chapters with me. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see where Eleanor and I go next. The light is on, the door is closed, and for the first time, I am home.